A black girl thinks she can fix my tank? Somebody get a camera, this is about to become the funniest joke this base has ever seen. Major General Victor Hawthorne sneered as he ripped the grease-stained wrench from Private Ariana Brooks's hand and deliberately threw it across the concrete hangar. The heavy tool clanged loudly before sliding beneath the motionless Titangent X prototype. Officers and contractors laughed as Ariana silently watched it disappear. Hawthorne stepped closer, looked her up and down with open contempt, then jabbed a finger into her chest. You're a black recruit who hasn't even earned the right to touch this machine. Women like you are here to follow orders, not to understand engineering. He paused, waiting for another wave of laughter before delivering an even crueler smile. Maybe after this demonstration you can go back to scrubbing mud off the tracks. That's the closest you'll ever get to commanding a tank. The crowd laughed again. Then Hawthorne spread both arms toward the $60 million prototype. Tell you what, he mocked. Fix this tank and I'll marry you. A captain snorted. She probably couldn't even find the ignition if we painted it bright red. Ariana never answered. She calmly walked to the disabled tank, picked up the wrench, and let her eyes drift across the engine deck before stopping on a tiny warning indicator hidden beneath an armored panel. The laughter slowly died, because the look on her face wasn't confusion, it was recognition, and in less than 20 seconds, everyone who had laughed at her would wish they hadn't. Before we reveal what happened next, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments. If you believe respect should be earned by character, not appearance, subscribe and stay with us, because this story is only getting started. 3 months earlier, the pre-dawn air at Fort Redstone carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel, wet earth, and hot steel. While most new recruits complained about the relentless schedule, Private Ariana Brooks silently welcomed every exhausting morning. Every rumble of an engine reminded her of childhood afternoons spent beside her father, Sergeant Daniel Brooks, inside noisy military maintenance depots. She could still remember his grease-covered hands resting gently on her shoulders. Machines always tell the truth, he used to say. People lie. Engines don't. Those words had stayed with her long after the folded American flag had been placed into her mother's trembling hands. Daniel Brooks had died during a classified field test 9 years earlier while protecting his crew from an ammunition explosion. The official reports praised his bravery but barely mentioned the countless engineering breakthroughs he had quietly contributed throughout his career. Ariana never forgot how quickly heroes could become forgotten names. That was why she had enlisted without asking for favors. No recommendations. No family connections, no special treatment. She wanted to earn every stripe on her own. Unfortunately, Fort Redstone wasn't interested in giving her that opportunity. Within her first week, Ariana noticed the difference. The male recruits rotated through driving simulators, diagnostic systems, and weapons familiarization. Ariana, however, spent most mornings hauling heavy equipment, cleaning muddy vehicle bays, and scrubbing grease from armored tracks until her fingers bled beneath her gloves. Whenever she finished one assignment, another somehow appeared. Corporal Dean Mercer tossed another bucket beside her. You're getting pretty good at cleaning, he said with a smug grin. Maybe that's your real specialty. Several nearby soldiers laughed. Ariana simply nodded. I'll finish it. Her calm response irritated Mercer more than any argument could have. You don't talk much, do you? She continued scrubbing. There isn't much to say. By the second month, rumors had spread throughout the maintenance battalion. Some claimed Ariana had only enlisted to earn college tuition. Others insisted she had accidentally been assigned to the armored division. A few openly questioned whether women belonged around 70-ton combat vehicles at all. No one bothered asking what she already knew. One afternoon, a group of mechanics crowded around the enormous Titangent X prototype inside the restricted maintenance hangar. Its angular armor reflected the bright overhead lights. Its hybrid propulsion system represented years of classified development. Only authorized engineers could approach within the marked safety line. Ariana paused for barely 2 seconds while carrying a crate of replacement filters. Her eyes instinctively followed the intricate arrangement of cooling ducts beneath the rear armor. She noticed a maintenance panel sitting slightly uneven, only a fraction of an inch. Most people would never have seen it. She quietly continued walking. Unfortunately, Major General Victor Hawthorne had noticed where she was looking. You. His sharp voice echoed through the hangar. Ariana immediately stopped. Private Brooks, front and center. She marched forward and saluted. Sir. Hawthorne slowly circled her, almost as if inspecting defective equipment. You seem fascinated by this vehicle. No, sir. No? He folded his arms. Then why were your eyes on my tank instead of the floor you're supposed to be cleaning? I was only passing through, sir. He laughed. So now you're shy. Several officers smirked. Hawthorne looked toward the engineers. You know what's dangerous? No one answered. A recruit who mistakes curiosity for competence. More laughter followed. He pointed toward a muddy section of the Titangent X tracks. If you have time to admire military hardware, you clearly have time to polish every inch of those tracks. Ariana answered immediately. Yes, sir. She spent nearly 3 hours kneeling beside the massive vehicle while dozens of officers walked past without acknowledging her existence. The afternoon sun baked the steel until it burned through her gloves. Sweat rolled into her eyes. Not once did she complain. Late that evening, as most personnel headed toward the barracks, an elderly civilian engineer quietly approached. His name tag read, Walter Hayes. Unlike everyone else, he didn't laugh. He watched Ariana carefully wipe grease from a suspension arm before speaking. You know the difference between cleaning and studying? She looked up. Sir? Most people stare at dirt. He smiled faintly. You've been studying this tank. For the first time all day, Ariana hesitated. I don't know what you mean. Hayes chuckled softly. You noticed that rear maintenance panel earlier. She remained silent. So did I. He lowered his voice. Very few people would have caught that. Before Ariana could respond, another mechanic called Walter back into the hangar. The conversation ended almost as quickly as it had begun, but something about the old engineer's expression lingered in Ariana's mind. He hadn't looked at her with amusement. He had looked at her with curiosity. Across the hangar, hidden behind temporary security barriers, technicians suddenly powered up the Titangent X for another systems evaluation. The massive engine roared to life. Then, a strange metallic vibration echoed beneath the rear compartment. Just for a second. Almost nobody reacted. Almost nobody noticed. Ariana did. Her eyes narrowed. The sound was wrong. Very wrong. She quietly watched the prototype disappear deeper into the testing facility, a familiar sense of unease settling over her. It was the exact kind of sound her father had warned her never to ignore. And somewhere inside the steel giant, a problem had already begun waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The metallic vibration lingered in Ariana Brooks's mind long after the Titangent X disappeared behind the blast doors of Test Hangar 3. She had heard that sound before, not from this tank, from another prototype years ago, standing beside her father while he crouched beneath an armored hull with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Daniel Brooks had stopped working immediately. Listen carefully, he had whispered. A machine whispers before it screams. At the time, 12-year-old Ariana hadn't understood what he meant. Now she did. The following morning, Fort Redstone buzzed with unusual energy. Military police tightened security around the testing grounds as civilian contractors unloaded specialized diagnostic equipment worth millions of dollars. Rumors spread through every barracks that a delegation from the Pentagon would arrive within days to inspect the Titangent X before Congress approved the next phase of funding. Everyone was under pressure. Everyone except Ariana. She quietly swept the maintenance floor while mechanics rushed past carrying tablets, sensor modules, and toolkits. As she emptied a bucket beside Bay 4, the Titangent X rolled slowly into the hangar under its own power. Its engine sounded powerful, but not healthy. There it was again, a faint clicking vibration beneath the rear compartment. Exactly 3 short pulses. Then silence. Ariana stopped sweeping. Her eyes followed the rotating cooling fans mounted beneath the armored housing. One fan accelerated a fraction of a second later than the others. Almost invisible. Almost. She instinctively took 2 careful steps closer. Civilian engineer Kyle Benton noticed. What are you doing? Ariana immediately stopped. Nothing, sir. Kyle folded his arms. You've been staring at this vehicle every chance you get. I only heard something unusual. Several nearby engineers looked over. Kyle laughed. Oh, really? He raised his voice deliberately. The recruit who cleans mud now thinks she's an engineer. The surrounding technicians chuckled. Kyle grabbed a diagnostic tablet and waved it in front of her face. Do you even know what this system measures? Ariana answered honestly, No, sir. Exactly. More laughter. She could have explained that she didn't need the tablet to recognize an airflow imbalance. She didn't. Kyle smirked. Here's some advice. Leave the diagnostics to people with degrees. Ariana simply nodded. Yes, sir. She picked up her broom and walked away. From the observation deck above, Major General Victor Hawthorne had witnessed the exchange. Instead of ending the humiliation, he encouraged it. Mr. Benton, Kyle looked up. Sir? If Private Brooks wants to learn engineering so badly, perhaps we should give her an educational assignment. The officers nearby grinned. Hawthorne descended the steel staircase with slow, deliberate steps until he stood directly beside Ariana. Private. Sir, I hear you've developed an interest in my prototype. No, sir. No? He pointed toward the enormous tracks coated in dried clay from yesterday's mobility trials. Then spend the next 4 hours cleaning every link until you can see your reflection. Ariana answered without hesitation. Yes, sir. As she knelt beside the 70-ton machine, soldiers passed by with amused smiles. One whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "Guess she finally found the only part of the tank she's qualified to work on." Another laughed. The tracks don't argue back. Ariana continued scrubbing. Each brushstroke revealed another layer of hardened steel. While cleaning beneath the rear suspension, she noticed something that made her heartbeat quicken. A tiny streak of fresh hydraulic residue, not enough to drip, just enough to catch the light. She frowned. Hydraulic seals on a prototype this new shouldn't show fresh seepage, especially after only a few field tests. Without thinking, she gently touched the residue with one fingertip. Still warm, very recent. She quietly stood and approached the nearest maintenance supervisor. "Excuse me, Sergeant Collins." He barely looked at her. "What?" "I think there's a hydraulic pressure issue near the rear cooling assembly." He sighed dramatically. "Did somebody ask you?" "No, Sergeant." "Then why are you diagnosing equipment? I just thought someone should—" He cut her off. "You thought?" Several mechanics looked over. Collins shook his head. "Your job is to clean." "Yes, Sergeant." "Not inspect." "Yes, Sergeant." "Not think you're smarter than certified engineers." A few soldiers laughed again. Ariana lowered her eyes. "I understand." She returned to work without another word. None of them noticed Walter Hayes standing quietly across the hangar. The elderly engineer had heard every word. Instead of laughing, he slowly walked toward the rear of the Titangent X. He knelt exactly where Ariana had pointed. His expression changed, almost imperceptibly. He wiped a finger across the hydraulic housing, looked at the thin film of oil, then glanced toward Ariana. She was already back on her knees, cleaning mud as if nothing had happened. Walter said nothing. Not yet. That afternoon, another systems test began. Technicians activated the propulsion sequence. The Titangent X roared awake. For nearly 30 seconds, everything appeared normal. Then, a brief warning flashed across the central diagnostics monitor. Cooling synchronization error. The message disappeared so quickly that most people never saw it. Walter did. So did Ariana. Kyle Benton frowned at the screen. "What was that?" Another engineer shrugged. "Probably a sensor glitch." The warning vanished. The engine continued running. General Hawthorne looked irritated. "Reset the software and move on." Nobody questioned the order. Nobody except Walter. He quietly glanced toward Ariana again. She wasn't looking at the monitor. She was listening to the rhythm of the engine. To everyone else, it sounded powerful. To her, it sounded like a countdown. As evening settled over Fort Redstone, Ariana returned alone to the nearly empty maintenance bay to finish cleaning her assigned area. She paused beside the silent Titangent X one last time. Without touching the vehicle, she whispered almost to herself, "You're trying to warn them." Behind her, an unexpected voice broke the silence. I was beginning to think I was the only one who heard it. Ariana slowly turned. Walter Hayes stood in the shadows, holding an old maintenance log against his chest. His eyes weren't filled with doubt anymore. They were filled with recognition. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Redstone, someone was about to ask Ariana a question no one else had thought to ask. Walter Hayes remained silent for several seconds, studying Ariana Brooks as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly begun making sense. "You heard it too," he finally said. Ariana lowered her voice. "The cooling system isn't synchronized." Walter's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an awfully specific observation for a private who's only supposed to be cleaning floors." Ariana offered a polite smile. "I've always been good at listening." Walter looked toward the massive Titangent X resting beneath the hangar lights. "Most engineers rely on computers. My father taught me that machines speak before computers do." The sentence escaped before Ariana realized she had said too much. Walter noticed. "Your father worked around military vehicles?" She hesitated for only a moment. "Yes." Before Walter could ask another question, the hangar doors burst open. "Everyone inside." Major General Victor Hawthorne's booming voice echoed through the maintenance bay. "The Pentagon delegation has moved tomorrow's inspection forward. We begin full operational testing immediately." Within seconds, mechanics, officers, and civilian contractors flooded the hangar. The atmosphere changed instantly. There was no laughter now, only pressure. The Titangent X wasn't simply another prototype anymore. It represented nearly a decade of research and billions of dollars in future defense contracts. Failure was no longer an option. Engineers hurried beneath the armored hull. Technicians connected diagnostic cables. Computer screens filled with streams of live telemetry. Walter quietly stepped away from Ariana. "Stay out of sight," he whispered. She nodded. "Yes, sir." By sunrise, the test field outside Fort Redstone looked more like a national event than a military exercise. Rows of American flags lined the observation platform. Members of Congress arrived in black SUVs. Senior officers from the Pentagon walked across the viewing deck carrying classified briefing folders. Defense contractors adjusted cameras while reporters waited outside the security perimeter. Major General Hawthorne stood proudly beside the TIE Tangent X, smiling for photographs. "This," he announced confidently, "is the future of American armored warfare." Applause followed. Ariana watched everything from nearly 100 yards away while unloading equipment from a supply truck. No one noticed her. That was how she preferred it. At precisely 9 o'clock, the demonstration began. The TIE Tangent X's engine ignited with its familiar thunder. The crowd applauded. The 60-ton machine rolled smoothly across the proving ground. Its turret rotated flawlessly. Targeting systems responded instantly. Everything appeared perfect, until it didn't. A sharp warning tone echoed across the control station. One warning light became 3. 3 became 7. Inside the command vehicle, technicians stared at their monitors. Cooling temperature rising. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating. Power distribution unstable. General Hawthorne frowned. "What is happening?" "We're checking, sir." The tank slowed. Its engine coughed once, twice. Then the enormous vehicle came to a complete stop in the middle of the demonstration field. Silence. Absolute silence. Thousands of eyes remained fixed on the motionless TIE Tangent X. One engineer tried restarting the ignition remotely. Nothing. Another attempted a systems reset. Nothing. A third connected emergency diagnostic software. Still nothing. General Hawthorne's confidence vanished. "I want that engine running now." Engineers rushed toward the vehicle. Panels were opened. Computers connected. Replacement modules installed. Every passing minute made the atmosphere more desperate. Pentagon officials began whispering among themselves. One congressional advisor checked his watch. Another quietly closed the presentation folder. Walter Hayes stood near the rear of the disabled tank, watching the growing panic. His eyes searched the crowd until they found Ariana. She wasn't watching the engineers. She was staring at the exhaust housing, almost as if she already knew exactly where the problem lived. Walter walked over. "What are you thinking?" Ariana answered carefully. "The warning yesterday wasn't a software error. You believe it's mechanical?" "I think it's both." Walter looked surprised. "Explain." She kept her voice barely above a whisper. "If the emergency synchronization valve sticks for even half a second, the control software keeps trying to compensate. Eventually, every protection system starts shutting itself down." Walter stared at her. "How do you know that?" Ariana looked toward the silent tank. "I've seen something similar before." Before Walter could ask another question, General Hawthorne stormed across the field. "There you are." Every nearby soldier immediately stepped back. The general's face burned with embarrassment. His demonstration had become a disaster, and he needed someone to blame. His eyes settled on Ariana. "You!" She stood at attention. "Sir, what are you doing standing around?" "I was assigned to the supply truck, sir." "Wrong." He pointed toward the disabled TIE Tangent X. "You've spent weeks staring at this machine instead of doing your work." The surrounding officers watched quietly. "So here's your new assignment." He reached into a nearby utility cart, grabbed a filthy brush coated with grease, and shoved it into Ariana's hands. "If this tank is going to embarrass me in front of the Pentagon, the least you can do is make sure its tracks shine while real engineers solve the problem." Several officers laughed uneasily. Ariana accepted the brush without protest. "Yes, sir." She walked toward the tracks and knelt beside the giant machine. As she cleaned away dried mud, her eyes drifted beneath the armored hull. Only for a second. That was all she needed. She saw it. The emergency synchronization housing. Exactly where she feared it would be. A tiny actuator arm sat half a centimeter out of alignment. Barely visible. Impossible to notice unless someone knew precisely where to look. Her heartbeat quickened. She finally understood. The fault wasn't random. It was the exact failure her father had once described as nearly impossible to diagnose during normal field operations. She instinctively stood. Walter noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ariana took one cautious step toward him. "I know what's wrong." Walter's expression froze. You do? She nodded once. I can fix it. Before Walter could respond, Major General Hawthorne overheard the final 4 words. He turned slowly. His cold smile returned. Oh, this should be interesting. The nearby officers looked toward Ariana. Mechanics stopped working. Even several Pentagon observers turned their attention toward the young private standing beside the silent Titangent X. The general folded his arms. What exactly did you just say, Private Brooks? The entire proving ground fell silent. The entire proving ground seemed to stop breathing. Major General Victor Hawthorne slowly walked toward Ariana Brooks, the polished heels of his boots striking the concrete with deliberate force. Around them, dozens of engineers remained frozen beside the disabled Titangent X, while Pentagon officials exchanged increasingly concerned whispers. Hawthorne stopped only inches from Ariana. You know what's wrong? He asked, his voice calm enough to make everyone uneasy. Yes, sir. And you can fix it? I believe I can. A sarcastic laugh escaped the general. You've been in my army for less than 3 months. Yes, sir. You've never attended Armored Systems School. No, sir. You hold no engineering certification. No, sir. He looked around at the crowd before raising his voice. Then explain to me why I should believe a private who spends her days scrubbing mud instead of the 37 engineers standing behind me. Laughter rippled through the maintenance crews. Ariana answered without raising her voice. I'm not asking you to believe me, sir. Hawthorne's smile faded slightly. I'm asking you to let me help. The response caught several people off guard. There was no arrogance, no challenge, only quiet confidence. That confidence irritated Hawthorne even more. You've got nerve, he said coldly. Do you have any idea who's watching us? He pointed toward the observation platform. Members of Congress. Another gesture. Pentagon acquisition officers. Then toward the rows of cameras. And defense contractors who have invested billions in this program. He leaned closer. If you touch this vehicle without authorization, you'll spend the rest of your military career filling sandbags. I understand, sir. But you still think you can repair it? Yes, sir. Before Hawthorne could respond, one of the lead civilian engineers hurried over carrying a rugged laptop. Kyle Benton reporting. His forehead glistened with sweat. We've completed another diagnostic cycle, and... Kyle hesitated. We still can't isolate the failure. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. What do you mean you can't isolate it? The software reports multiple cascading faults, but none of them appear to be the root cause. Another engineer joined them. We've replaced 3 control modules. No change. Hydraulic pressure? Normal. Fuel delivery? Normal. Electrical system? No faults. Hawthorne clenched his fists. Then why won't my tank start? No one answered. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Across the viewing platform, several Pentagon representatives quietly stepped away from the demonstration area. One congressional staff member whispered something into another official's ear while pointing toward a thick budget binder. Walter Hayes noticed. His expression darkened. He walked toward Kyle Benton. Have you checked the synchronization actuator? Kyle barely looked at him. Twice. Physically? We ran diagnostics. Walter frowned. I asked if anyone physically inspected it. Kyle sighed impatiently. The computer says it's functioning. Walter glanced toward Ariana. She was still standing exactly where Hawthorne had left her. Waiting, watching, listening. Meanwhile, another attempt was made to restart the Titangent X. The starter engaged. The turbine spun. For one hopeful second, the massive engine seemed ready to roar back to life. Instead, a sharp metallic bang echoed from inside the rear compartment. The engine shut itself down instantly. A warning siren blared across the proving ground. Several officers instinctively stepped backward. One Pentagon observer removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Another quietly closed his notebook. The demonstration was collapsing. General Hawthorne looked as though years had been added to his face in a matter of minutes. Then came the announcement everyone feared. A senior acquisition director approached carrying a tablet. General, Hawthorne turned. The assistant secretary's office has requested an update. We're resolving it. The official remained expressionless. They've also informed us that if today's demonstration fails, tomorrow's funding vote may be postponed indefinitely. The words struck the crowd like a shockwave. Postponed. Everyone knew what that actually meant. Without congressional approval, billions of dollars would disappear. Years of development could be canceled overnight. Several contractors immediately began arguing among themselves. We told them to delay field testing. No, quality assurance signed off. This isn't our software. It has to be a mechanical failure. Voices overlapped until the hangar filled with accusations. No one accepted responsibility. No one had an answer. Only Ariana remained quiet. Walter slowly walked toward her. Private. She turned. What exactly do you think is happening? She glanced toward the Tangent X before speaking. The actuator isn't completely locked. Walter listened carefully. It's stopping halfway. Go on. The control computer thinks it's engaged, but it isn't. So every restart creates another synchronization conflict. Walter felt a chill run through him. She wasn't guessing. She was describing the sequence exactly as if she had written the operating logic herself. He lowered his voice. How certain are you? 99%. Walter stared at her. That's an awfully precise number. Ariana smiled faintly. My father never allowed me to be 100% certain. Those words struck Walter harder than she realized. His eyes narrowed. Your father. Before he could finish, his gaze drifted to the stitched name above Ariana's uniform pocket. Brooks. His breathing slowed. He looked back at her face. The eyes, the calm voice, the way she listened to engines instead of computers. A memory surfaced from nearly 10 years earlier. A little girl sitting inside Engineering Bay 2 with oversized safety goggles slipping down her nose while Sergeant Daniel Brooks laughed beside her. Mr. Hayes, Daniel had said proudly, meet my daughter. She hears machines better than I do. Walter suddenly felt as though the air had vanished from the proving ground. It couldn't be. Could it? He looked at Ariana again. This time, he wasn't seeing an inexperienced recruit. He was seeing Daniel Brooks all over again. Before he could say another word, a military police vehicle pulled onto the testing field. Another convoy followed behind it. Black SUVs bearing Pentagon markings rolled through the security gate. Every conversation stopped. Doors opened. Senior officials stepped out, one after another. At their center walked Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell, one of the Army's highest-ranking modernization commanders. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even Major General Hawthorne straightened his uniform before walking forward to greet him. Walter remained where he was. His eyes never left Ariana. The truth that had been buried for nearly a decade was beginning to assemble itself piece by piece. And for the first time since Daniel Brooks's death, Walter Hayes believed he knew exactly why Private Ariana Brooks had enlisted at Fort Redstone. Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell's convoy had barely stopped before every officer on the proving ground snapped to attention. Major General Victor Hawthorne strode forward with forced confidence and rendered a sharp salute. General Mitchell, welcome to Fort Redstone. We experienced a minor technical interruption during today's demonstration. Mitchell's calm eyes shifted toward the silent Tangent X, sitting helplessly in the middle of the test field. A minor interruption? No one answered. The Pentagon called it a complete systems failure. The words struck Hawthorne like a hammer. We're working on it, sir. I certainly hope so. Mitchell continued toward the disabled prototype, surrounded by aides carrying classified folders. Engineers instinctively stepped aside, leaving an uneasy silence behind. Walter Hayes remained near Ariana Brooks. He looked at her uniform again. Brooks? The name no longer felt like coincidence. Private, Walter whispered. Sir? How long has your father been gone? Ariana lowered her eyes. 9 years. Walter swallowed. Daniel Brooks? She slowly nodded. For several seconds, Walter couldn't speak. He remembered a younger Daniel standing inside this very base, with grease covering his hands and blueprints tucked beneath his arm. He remembered the countless nights Daniel had refused to leave until every prototype was safe enough for soldiers to trust with their lives. More than anything, Walter remembered the little girl who used to follow him everywhere. You used to sit on an old ammunition crate while your father worked, Walter said quietly. Ariana's eyes widened. You remember? I remember a child asking why engines sounded different when they were scared. A faint smile crossed Ariana's face for the first time in days. My father laughed for an hour after I asked that. So did I. The smile quickly disappeared. Walter looked toward the disabled Tangent X. He taught you everything, didn't he? He taught me how to listen. He taught you more than that. Ariana hesitated. He never wanted me to become famous for what I knew. What did he want? He wanted soldiers to come home. Walter closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Before either of them could continue, a loud voice echoed across the proving ground. Kyle! Major General Hawthorne waved angrily. Report! Kyle Benton hurried over carrying another diagnostic tablet. We've completed the 5th systems analysis. And Kyle looked embarrassed. No definitive fault. Hawthorne's face reddened. You've had nearly 2 hours. We've replaced every suspected component. And the result? The tank still won't start. The general slammed his fist against the armored hull. Damn it. Across the observation platform, several congressional representatives quietly began collecting their briefing material. One defense contractor whispered to another, "If this vehicle fails today, Congress will never approve production." A second contractor nodded. Billions of dollars are about to disappear. The pressure was becoming unbearable. Walter turned back toward Ariana. "You know exactly what's wrong, don't you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the breast pocket of her coveralls. From inside, she carefully removed a small, worn leather notebook. Its edges were faded, its pages yellowed with age. Walter stared. "Is that?" "My father's." She gently opened it. Every page was filled with hand-drawn diagrams, handwritten calculations, and maintenance notes written in Daniel Brooks's unmistakable handwriting. Folded inside the back cover rested a single photograph. A young Ariana, barely 13 years old, stood beside Daniel in front of an unfinished armored chassis. Both of them were smiling, their hands stained black with grease. Walter felt emotion tighten his throat. "I thought all of his research was archived. So did everyone else. He kept this? He gave it to me the week before he died." Walter carefully accepted the notebook. As he turned several pages, one heading immediately caught his attention. Emergency Synchronization Override. His breathing stopped. Below the title was a handwritten warning. Never rely solely on software diagnostics. Inspect actuator alignment manually before replacing electronic modules. Walter slowly looked up. "My God." Ariana nodded. "The failure we're seeing today is exactly what's described here." "Yes." Walter flipped another page. There, sketched in remarkable detail, was the rear synchronization housing of the Titangent X prototype. Not merely similar, identical. Every bolt, every actuator, every emergency access point. Walter looked back toward the disabled vehicle. "No contractor ever showed us these drawings. My father wasn't allowed to publish them. Why? He believed too many people depended on computers." Walter suddenly understood. Daniel had anticipated today's failure nearly a decade earlier. The notebook wasn't simply a diary. It was a roadmap. Before Walter could say another word, hurried footsteps approached. Kyle Benton stopped beside them. "There you are." His eyes immediately fell on the notebook. "What's that?" Walter calmly closed the cover. "Nothing that concerns you." Kyle frowned. "The general wants every engineer back at the tank." Walter answered evenly. "Then you'd better stop replacing computers." Kyle looked confused. "What?" "The problem isn't inside the software." Kyle laughed dismissively. "With respect, Mr. Hayes, we've been doing this for 20 years. Walter's voice hardened. "And how's that working out?" Kyle's expression froze. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Walter looked back at Ariana. "The notebook stays with you." She carefully returned it to her pocket. "What are you going to do?" Walter glanced toward Lieutenant General Mitchell, who was now questioning Hawthorne beside the disabled prototype. "I'm going to make sure someone finally listens." Before Ariana could stop him, Walter began walking across the proving ground. Each step felt heavier than the last, because he wasn't simply carrying an opinion. He was carrying the last unfinished legacy of Sergeant Daniel Brooks. And before this day ended, Fort Redstone would finally learn that the forgotten engineer everyone had stopped talking about had already left behind the only answer capable of saving the Titangent X. Walter Hayes stopped less than 10 feet from Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell before Major General Victor Hawthorne stepped directly into his path. "Where do you think you're going?" Hawthorne demanded. Walter remained composed. "I have information about the Titangent X. You've had all morning. This is different." Hawthorne folded his arms. "No, Mr. Hayes. What's different is that you've suddenly decided to question the people actually running this program." Walter didn't flinch. "I'm trying to save it." The general's expression hardened. "No, you're creating another distraction." Lieutenant General Mitchell noticed the confrontation and walked toward them. "Is there a problem?" Before Walter could answer, Hawthorne spoke first. "Nothing serious, sir. One of our retired consultants believes he has another theory." Mitchell looked at Walter. "Do you?" "I do. And—" Walter glanced toward Ariana, who was still kneeling beside the tank with a brush in her hand. "The person who understands this failure best isn't standing with the engineers." Several officers instinctively turned to look. Hawthorne laughed. "Oh, please don't tell me you're talking about the recruit." Walter answered without hesitation. "I am." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Mitchell followed Walter's gaze. "The private?" "Yes, sir." Hawthorne shook his head in disbelief. "This has become ridiculous." He pointed directly at Ariana. That young woman has spent her entire morning cleaning tracks because that's the only qualification she's demonstrated. Ariana slowly stood as every eye settled on her. Mitchell asked calmly, "Private, step forward." She walked across the concrete and saluted. Private Ariana Brooks reporting, "Sir." Mitchell studied her face. "Mr. Hayes believes you know something about this vehicle." Before Ariana could answer, Hawthorne interrupted again. "Sir, she's an inexperienced recruit with less than 3 months in uniform." Mitchell raised a hand. "I asked the private." The general reluctantly stepped back. Mitchell returned his attention to Ariana. "Do you believe you know what's causing the failure?" "Yes, sir." "What is it?" She hesitated. "I'd rather show you than explain it." Several engineers exchanged skeptical smiles. Kyle Benton folded his arms. "Convenient." Mitchell noticed the reaction. "Mr. Benton, you've been working on this system all day?" "Yes, sir." "Have you fixed it?" Kyle looked down. "No, sir." Mitchell nodded once before turning back to Ariana. "If I allow you to inspect the vehicle, how long will it take?" "Less than 1 minute." The words triggered laughter from several contractors. One senior engineer actually shook his head. "A minute?" Another scoffed. "We've spent nearly 3 hours." Hawthorne smiled again, sensing an opportunity. He slowly walked around Ariana as though addressing an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he spread both hands dramatically. "Our maintenance recruit believes she can accomplish in 1 minute what some of the finest armored engineers in America couldn't accomplish all morning." More laughter erupted. Ariana remained silent. Hawthorne stopped directly in front of her. "Tell me something, Private." She looked him in the eyes. "Sir? Do you even understand what this vehicle costs?" "Yes, sir." "How much?" "Approximately $60 million. He smirked. "And if you damage it, I'll accept responsibility." The answer briefly caught him off guard. Then he laughed even harder. "Responsibility?" He looked toward the crowd. "Does anyone know what a private earns in a year?" Several people chuckled. "You'd have to serve half a lifetime just to pay for one damaged hatch." The laughter grew louder. Mitchell watched quietly. He hadn't spoken in several minutes. He was studying Ariana's composure far more than Hawthorne's insults. Most young recruits would have looked terrified. She didn't. She looked patient. Hawthorne wasn't finished. He stepped closer until they were almost face to face. "I've met recruits with confidence before." He lowered his voice. "But confidence without experience is called arrogance." Ariana answered softly. "Sometimes, sir. And sometimes experience forgets to listen." The sentence stunned everyone nearby. Even Walter looked surprised. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't emotional. It was simply true. Hawthorne's face darkened instantly. "So now you're lecturing senior officers?" "No, sir." "Then what exactly are you doing?" "I'm trying to save the demonstration." For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then Hawthorne clapped slowly, dripping with sarcasm. "Outstanding." He turned toward the crowd. "Our recruit wants to save us." Another wave of laughter followed. Then the general pointed dramatically toward the disabled Titangent X. His voice echoed across the proving ground. "You know what, Private Brooks?" Ariana stood perfectly still. "If you're so certain..." He paused just long enough for every conversation to stop. "Then go ahead." His smile widened into open mockery. "Fix this tank and I'll marry you." The proving ground exploded with laughter. Several contractors bent over laughing. Mechanics lifted their phones again. One captain whispered, "This is going to end her career." Another muttered, "She's about to embarrass herself in front of the Pentagon." Even a few young soldiers looked away, unable to watch. Only Ariana remained calm. She looked once at Walter. He gave the smallest nod. Then she looked toward Lieutenant General Mitchell. The senior commander didn't laugh. Instead, he asked one simple question. "Private Brooks." The entire crowd fell silent again. "If I give you one chance..." He took a slow step closer. "Can you start that tank?" Ariana drew a quiet breath. "Yes, sir." Mitchell searched her face for several long seconds. There wasn't a trace of fear, only certainty. He turned toward the gathered officers. "Everyone step away from the vehicle." Hawthorne blinked in disbelief. "Sir? You heard my order. But she's just a recruit." Mitchell's voice became firm. "And every expert you've assigned has already failed." No one moved. The general reluctantly gestured toward the engineers. "Clear the area." One by one, the technicians backed away from the Titangent X. For the first time all day, the $60 million prototype stood completely alone, except for one young black private walking steadily toward it with nothing but a wrench in her hand. The fate of the entire program now rested on the shoulders of the one person everyone had laughed at. The proving ground fell into complete silence. Nearly 300 soldiers, engineers, contractors, and Pentagon officials watched as Private Ariana Brooks walked alone toward the motionless Titangent X. Every pair of eyes followed her. The only sound was the wind sweeping across the concrete and the faint clicking of camera shutters from the press platform. Major General Victor Hawthorne folded his arms confidently. He wasn't expecting a miracle. He was expecting humiliation. Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell, however, never took his eyes off Ariana. She climbed onto the side of the 70-ton vehicle with practiced confidence. Her movements weren't rushed. They weren't hesitant either. She reached the rear engine compartment, rested one hand against the warm armor, and quietly closed her eyes. Several engineers exchanged puzzled looks. "What is she doing?" "Listening," Walter Hayes whispered. Kyle Benton scoffed. "Listening won't restart an engine." Walter didn't bother answering. Ariana opened her eyes. The sound was still there. A faint metallic resistance. Not loud. Not obvious. Exactly where she expected it. She reached into her pocket and carefully unfolded her father's worn leather notebook. The pages fluttered in the breeze until they stopped on a diagram she knew by heart. She didn't need to read it. She only needed to remember his voice. "Never trust the first symptom. Find the part that's lying to the computer." Ariana closed the notebook and placed it safely back inside her pocket. Then, instead of opening the main service panel like every engineer before her, she knelt beside a narrow emergency access cover hidden behind the exhaust shielding. Kyle frowned immediately. "What is she doing?" Another engineer answered. "There isn't supposed to be anything important behind that panel." Walter quietly replied, "That's because none of you ever knew it existed." Ariana loosened 2 retaining bolts with astonishing speed. 6 turns, a quarter twist, 1 gentle pull. The small panel came free. A murmur swept across the crowd. One contractor whispered, "I've never seen that compartment." Neither had most of the engineers. Inside sat a compact synchronization actuator connected to a spring-loaded alignment arm, exactly as Daniel Brooks had drawn it years earlier. Ariana smiled softly. "There you are." She gently pressed the actuator. It moved halfway, then stuck. She nodded to herself. Just like Dad predicted, without hesitation, she reached for a slender alignment rod mounted beside the housing. One precise adjustment, a soft, metallic click echoed inside the compartment. Walter's eyes widened. "Oh me God!" Kyle leaned forward. "What happened?" Walter answered quietly. "She just realigned the emergency synchronization valve." Kyle stared in disbelief. "But we never touched that assembly." "No." Walter looked at him. "You never knew to." Ariana secured the access panel again. The entire repair had taken less than 20 seconds. She climbed down from the tank and walked calmly toward Lieutenant General Mitchell. "I'm finished, sir." Several officers blinked. "Finished?" Kyle laughed nervously. "That's impossible." General Hawthorne shook his head with open contempt. "So that's your grand repair?" Ariana simply nodded. "Yes, sir." The general spread his hands dramatically toward Mitchell. "With respect, sir." She tightened 2 bolts. The crowd chuckled uncertainly. Mitchell remained expressionless. He looked at Ariana. "Are you asking me to restart the vehicle?" "Yes, sir." He turned toward the chief test operator. "Proceed." The operator swallowed hard before pressing the ignition sequence. Every person on the proving ground instinctively held their breath. The starter motor engaged. A low electric whine echoed beneath the armor. For 1 terrifying second, nothing happened. Hawthorne smirked. "I knew." Before he could finish, "Whom?" The Titangent X roared to life with a deep, thunderous growl that rolled across the proving ground like distant artillery. A blast of hot air surged from the exhaust vents. The massive engine settled into a perfectly balanced idle. No warning lights, no alarms, no vibration. The synchronization display glowed green. Inside the command station, technicians stared at their monitors in stunned silence. One engineer blinked repeatedly. "Cooling system." Another looked over his shoulder. "Fully synchronized. Hydraulic pressure stable. Power distribution nominal. No fault codes. No emergency warnings." Every system was operating flawlessly. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody even seemed capable of speaking. Then the impossible became undeniable. Applause erupted from the Pentagon observation platform. It started with one official, then another. Soon, dozens of people were clapping. Several soldiers who had laughed only minutes earlier now looked at Ariana with open disbelief. Some quietly lowered their phones. Others couldn't even meet her eyes. Kyle Benton slowly removed his glasses. He couldn't finish the sentence. Walter Hayes smiled through moist eyes. "I knew it." "No," he whispered to himself. "Daniel knew it. Major General Hawthorne stood completely motionless. The arrogant smile had disappeared from his face. He stared at the running Titangent X as though it had betrayed him. Then he slowly turned toward Ariana. For the first time all day, he had absolutely nothing to say. But Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell did. He stepped forward, looked at the perfectly functioning tank, then at the quiet young private standing beside it. His voice carried clearly across the entire proving ground. "Private Brooks." He paused, allowing every eye to settle on Ariana once more. "I believe everyone here deserves to know exactly who you are." Walter closed his eyes. The moment he had waited nearly a decade to witness had finally arrived. And within the next few minutes, the forgotten truth about Sergeant Daniel Brooks and the remarkable young woman standing before the Army's highest leaders would change Fort Redstone forever. No one applauded anymore. The thunderous roar of the Titangent X's engine faded into a steady, confident rumble, but the silence surrounding Private Ariana Brooks felt even louder. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on the young black recruit who had accomplished in less than 20 seconds what an entire team of elite engineers had failed to do in nearly 4 hours. Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell slowly approached her. "Private Brooks." "Sir." He studied her for a long moment before asking the question everyone else wanted answered. "Who taught you to repair that synchronization actuator?" Ariana hesitated. She glanced toward Walter Hayes, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Finally," she answered, "my father, sir." "And who was your father?" The proving ground became so quiet that the faint idle of the Titangent X echoed across the concrete. "Sergeant Daniel Brooks." Walter lowered his head. Several older civilian engineers exchanged confused glances. Then one gray-haired contractor suddenly gasped. "Daniel Brooks." Another engineer whispered, "The systems engineer. The one who died during the Black Ridge prototype explosion." Mitchell nodded solemnly. "That's correct." He slowly turned toward the crowd. "Many of you are too young to remember Sergeant Daniel Brooks, but before most of you arrived at Fort Redstone, he solved problems no one else could solve. He looked directly at Major General Hawthorne, and he never cared who received the credit." Hawthorne's confident posture began to crumble. Mitchell continued. "Years ago, when the first Titangent X prototype suffered repeated synchronization failures during classified testing, our contractors believed the software needed to be rewritten." He paused. Daniel Brooks disagreed. The crowd listened in complete silence. "He proved the software wasn't the problem." Mitchell pointed toward the rear compartment Ariana had opened only minutes earlier. "The real weakness was mechanical alignment." A murmur spread through the engineers. Kyle Benton slowly looked toward the hidden access panel. Mitchell continued. "Daniel designed an emergency synchronization override that allowed the actuator to be manually realigned in the field." One Pentagon official quietly added, "It saved the entire modernization program." Mitchell nodded. "It did." Walter reached into his briefcase. "Sir." He carefully removed the worn leather notebook Ariana had shown him earlier. "I believe this belongs in your hands." Mitchell accepted it respectfully. As he opened the first page, recognition immediately crossed his face. "I remember this handwriting." He slowly turned several pages until he reached the detailed sketches of the synchronization housing. Every drawing matched the Titangent X exactly. Every handwritten warning described the precise failure that had stopped today's demonstration. At the bottom of the page, Daniel Brooks had written one final sentence. "If this failure ever returns, don't replace computers. Realign the actuator first." Mitchell closed the notebook. Then he looked toward Ariana. "Your father finished these notes?" "Yes, sir." "And you studied every page?" "For years." Mitchell smiled gently. "I can tell." Major General Hawthorne suddenly stepped forward. "Sir." Mitchell turned. "Yes, General. There must be some misunderstanding." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "We were never informed this notebook existed." Walter answered before Mitchell could. "Because no one ever asked Daniel's family." Hawthorne looked uncomfortable. "We relied on official technical archives." Walter's voice sharpened. "The archives were incomplete." Mitchell slowly nodded. "Mr. Hayes is correct." The general's shoulders stiffened. Mitchell's expression became noticeably colder. General Hawthorne. "Sir, how many times did Private Brooks request permission to speak today?" Hawthorne hesitated. Walter answered quietly. "At least 3. Kyle Benton lowered his eyes. Mitchell continued. "And each time?" No one spoke. Walter finally broke the silence. "She was ignored." Another engineer cleared his throat. "Actually." Everyone turned toward him. "I heard her yesterday." Kyle looked shocked. The engineer continued. "She mentioned the hydraulic synchronization issue before today's demonstration." Another technician slowly raised his hand. "So did I." "I thought she was guessing." Walter shook his head. She wasn't guessing. Mitchell looked toward Ariana again. Private. Sir, when you first saw the warning yesterday, I already knew where the fault was. Mitchell nodded slowly. But you never forced your way into the project. No, sir. You never announced your background. No, sir. You simply waited. Yes, sir. Why? Ariana looked across the proving ground, at the soldiers, the mechanics, the engineers who had laughed. Finally, she answered, my father taught me that respect earned through ability lasts longer than respect demanded through reputation. Several officers quietly lowered their heads. Even Kyle Benton looked ashamed. Mitchell smiled. Your father taught you well. Then his expression became serious. Military police. 2 investigators immediately stepped forward. I want every recording made during today's demonstration collected. Hawthorne blinked. Sir, I also want every surveillance camera covering this proving ground secured. The general's face paled. May I ask why? Mitchell looked directly into his eyes. Because I intend to review exactly how one of the most qualified people on this installation was treated. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. One young lieutenant quietly handed Mitchell a tablet. Sir. Mitchell tapped the screen. The first video began playing. There was Hawthorne, laughing, mocking Ariana. Fix this tank and I'll marry you. The laughter from the crowd echoed across the speakers. Another clip followed. She's only qualified to clean tracks. Then another. Leave engineering to people with degrees. Each recording cut deeper than the last. The people who had laughed earlier now stood frozen with embarrassment. Mitchell slowly lowered the tablet. The Army demands excellence. His voice carried across the entire proving ground. It also demands dignity. He looked directly at Hawthorne, and today, both standards were violated. For the first time in his distinguished military career, Major General Victor Hawthorne had no defense, only silence, only the weight of every careless word he had spoken. And everyone at Fort Redstone knew that before the sun set, justice would no longer be a possibility. It would be inevitable. The afternoon sun hung low over Fort Redstone, as an uneasy silence settled across the proving ground. No one moved. No one dared speak. The Titangent X continued idling flawlessly behind Private Ariana Brooks, its engine producing the deep, steady rhythm that every engineer had been struggling to hear all day. Just hours earlier, the vehicle had represented embarrassment. Now it stood as undeniable proof that the Army's youngest recruit had seen what every expert had overlooked. Lieutenant General Raymond Mitchell slowly turned toward Major General Victor Hawthorne. General Hawthorne. Sir, I am relieving you of operational command of today's demonstration. Effective immediately. A stunned gasp rippled through the crowd. Hawthorne blinked. Sir, surely this can be discussed privately. Mitchell's expression never changed. It already has been. Military police officers stepped forward, not aggressively. Professionally, one captain extended his hand. General, your sidearm and command credentials, please. Hawthorne stared in disbelief. You can't be serious. Mitchell answered calmly. I am very serious. For the first time in decades, Victor Hawthorne realized that rank could no longer shield him from accountability. His hands trembled ever so slightly as he removed his command badge. The same officers who had laughed beside him only an hour earlier now avoided eye contact altogether. The humiliation he had so eagerly inflicted upon another had quietly returned to him. Mitchell then addressed the gathering. An official investigation will begin immediately. He looked toward the judge-advocate officers who had just arrived. The investigation will examine allegations of discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, suppression of professional input, and violations of Army leadership standards. The legal team nodded. Every statement had been recorded. Every surveillance camera had been secured. Every phone video had been collected. There would be no rewriting of history. Kyle Benton slowly stepped away from the engineering team. His shoulders sagged under the weight of regret. He stopped in front of Ariana. I owe you an apology. She looked at him quietly. I judged you before I ever listened to you. He swallowed. When you warned us yesterday, I ignored you. When you pointed toward the actuator, I laughed. He lowered his head. I've spent 22 years calling myself an engineer. His voice cracked. Today, a 22-year-old private reminded me what engineering actually means. Ariana offered a gentle smile. My father always said that every machine deserves curiosity. Kyle nodded. I wish I had met him. So do I. Walter Hayes quietly stepped beside them. You would have liked Daniel. Kyle looked toward Walter. I already know. Walter smiled. You just met the best part of him. His eyes shifted toward Ariana. Standing right here. Nearby, several mechanics slowly approached. On ebe on. The same soldiers who had mocked Ariana earlier that morning now stood before her. Corporal Dean Mercer was the first. "I called you a janitor." "I'm sorry." Another mechanic spoke next. "I recorded you because I thought you were about to embarrass yourself." He quietly deleted the video from his phone. "I should have been recording the people laughing instead." A young lieutenant stepped forward. "I never said anything." He hesitated. "But I laughed." Ariana answered gently. "Sometimes silence helps the wrong person." The lieutenant lowered his head. "It won't happen again." Not far away, members of Congress gathered around Lieutenant General Mitchell. One senior senator looked toward the still-running Titangent X. "So the program survives?" Mitchell smiled. "It survives because one soldier refused to let her pride become louder than her purpose." The senator nodded thoughtfully. "And because another soldier left behind knowledge worth protecting." Mitchell looked toward Ariana. "Exactly." 2 weeks later, Fort Redstone looked very different. The investigation concluded that Major General Victor Hawthorne had repeatedly violated Army leadership principles by creating a hostile command climate, dismissing legitimate technical concerns without evaluation, and publicly humiliating subordinate personnel. His command was permanently terminated. He accepted early retirement under administrative review. Kyle Benton and several senior engineers received formal disciplinary actions and mandatory leadership retraining. The Army also announced sweeping changes to its technical reporting procedures. From that day forward, every soldier, regardless of rank, would have the right to submit documented safety concerns directly to engineering review boards. The policy became known throughout the installation as the Brooks Protocol. But the most emotional ceremony took place one crisp autumn morning. Families, veterans, engineers, and active-duty soldiers gathered outside the newly renovated Engineering Development Center. Covered by a large American flag stood a polished black granite monument. Lieutenant General Mitchell invited Ariana to stand beside him. He looked toward the audience. Some heroes become famous. He paused. Others quietly save lives and are forgotten. He gently pulled away the flag. The inscription appeared. Sergeant Daniel Brooks. Engineer, soldier, mentor. His ideas protected generations he would never meet. Ariana covered her mouth. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Walter Hayes rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He should have received this years ago." Mitchell nodded. "He did." Walter looked confused. Mitchell smiled. "He received it the day he taught his daughter to put service before recognition." Ariana stood before the memorial for several quiet moments. Then she reached into her pocket. She removed her father's worn leather notebook. Carefully, she placed it inside a glass display case prepared beside the monument. "This belongs here now," she whispered, "so everyone who serves after me can keep learning from him." The crowd answered with a standing ovation. Months later, Private Ariana Brooks graduated at the top of the Army's Advanced Engineering Leadership Program. She was selected for direct commissioning as a second lieutenant in the Armor Systems Engineering Corps, the youngest officer ever chosen through the program. Before leaving Fort Redstone, she walked one final time through the maintenance bay, where she had once spent endless hours cleaning mud from steel tracks. A group of new recruits noticed her. One young private hurried over. "Ma'am." Ariana smiled. "You don't have to call me ma'am when we're standing in a workshop." The nervous recruit laughed. "I heard the story about the Titangent X. I'm sure you've heard several versions. I only wanted to ask one question." "What is it?" The young soldier pointed toward a massive armored vehicle waiting for inspection. "How did you know where to start?" Ariana looked at the machine for a long moment before answering. "My father taught me something I'll never forget." She gently placed one hand against the cold steel. "Before you try to prove you're the smartest person in the room," she smiled, "be the person willing to listen the longest." The recruits quietly nodded. Some lessons could never be found inside manuals. They were earned through humility, through courage, and through choosing character over recognition. Long after the crowd had gone home, the Titangent X rolled across the proving ground one final time during sunset. Its engine ran flawlessly, not because technology had become perfect, but because one forgotten legacy had finally been remembered. Sometimes the world judges people by their rank, appearance, or background before ever recognizing their character. Real greatness doesn't demand attention. It reveals itself through humility, courage, and quiet excellence when the moment truly mattered. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about justice, resilience, and the extraordinary strength hidden in ordinary people.